Welcome to another edition of the Matt and Matt Show. This is the second official podcast coming at you 2 weeks after we were in London. And isn't it the funny thing about time, Matt? It was here already, and then we were talking, and it's like, oh, it's time to do it.
Time to do it. And we made it to episode 2. So for the fans that we've already kind of dragged into this, thanks for hanging on. We plan in episode 3, but I've set a reminder on my calendar now to make sure that we're doing this at least at the end of every 2 weeks. And then do some planning, which you and I did before this call about some of the things that we've been following. So we did a bit of catch up. You've been traveling again. I'm about to leave for New York tomorrow morning. But the thing that you brought up that I want to get to right away, because I think it's just fascinating. It's probably more fascinating than anything we'll talk about. And that's kitchen remodeling. You're in the midst of this, and I asked you to not tell me about it, so that we could wait to talk about it and I could hear all the shock and awe. But why don't you lay on, because I've been through home remodeling repair projects before. I hope to never have to do them again, but I can't wait to vicariously hear what's happening.
Well, I'll say we're doing this much like with DXPs because of a data leak, although this was more a water leak. So back in September, we noticed a leak into our finished basement, which is where I come to you now in the studio. So we have a nice finished basement, and there was a leak in one part of it. And that was the first time that's ever happened here, right? And that's alarming when you're in a finished basement. And it led to the plumber coming. This is back in September. And the area underneath the kitchen sink was just soaked. But I guess over time it had soaked up enough water that we didn't notice it. And now it was just a wreck, which then led to the only way to get this figured out is to open up the ceilings, is to open up the under the sink. And then, of course, we have to fix some things there. Insurance is going to have to get in the mix. And sometimes, at least in the old days, it would lead to some level of a new kitchen. But there was a big back and forth. I won't call it a fight. It was a back and forth, or as they say in Britain, a row. And we're here now in what month of March. It's taken us all the way to now to where we have decided to take what insurance is going to give us as some level of a down payment on a new kitchen. So it's not an aspirational remodel. It's a required remodel. And it's going to be a little bit of as I joked before, a little bit of a lift and shift. But we're going to have a new kitchen, new floors, new cabinets. It's time for it. But my kitchen right now is just completely gone. And I got home. My wife and I were up really late last night, keeping the things that we want to keep, and then just having the demo crew come in and take everything else. But I got home and it looks like I have a studio apartment in my living room because the kitchen set's in there, the fridge is in there, the water cooler, and but it's going to be temporary. Yeah. And we'll have a new kitchen at some point. I don't know about you, but sometimes when these happen, things like this, or when you live in the Northeast, or even if you live down by you during storm season, there's something about losing power or losing your level of comfort that I sometimes find, for at least for a minute, a little fun. Almost like you're camping and you kind of have to reinvent your situation. And I don't know, there's something nice to that for a night or two.
I think the night or two is good. And I think camping is a matter of choice, right? So I'm electing to go rough it a little bit, right? And typically, for those of us that have camped, I remember taking my son when he was in Scouts as a kid. I took him to I think it was a park that the Scout troop was camping in, and I was fully prepared. We had all the accoutrements that we could possibly have. But one thing you can't control is the weather, and it rained. I mean, there was probably 2 inches in the bottom of the tent of not cold, but like lukewarm, not comfortable water. And after your sleeping bag is soaked and you need to go move to the car, the spit and polish kind of runs off of the whole idea of, hey, we really like this camping thing. We're going to be regular campers, and I grew up doing that maybe just by virtue of not having the money to do a lot of extensive traveling with my family. We tend to do it on the cheap, but I think translating that into a modern era where it's you expect to have a lot of the creature comforts. I agree with you. I think there's something fun about it when it's in any form, but when it's forced upon you, when it's thrust upon you, that's when getting uncomfortable is not fun. And I think you can find the fun in electing to do it. I think it's all attitude anyway, though, right? So even if it's something that happens unexpectedly like this, you still look for, hey, how can we make this fun? How can we get the kids around a makeshift fake indoor campsite or something, and turn, a pillow fort or something and turn it into something fun.
Yeah, and it's been, like I said, these 2 weeks came really fast between our show, and it's amazing how fast, however many months this has gone. My wife might not say so, and then, of course, there's never a good time to have a very busy week like I had this week, but there were points where she was like, "Wait, you're going to Toronto on this?" And I said, "I I don't know what to tell you." And then today it was, "You're going to you're going to New York on the first day?" And I said, you can't really control these things, and we'll be through it soon. And you know what? There's a lot of stuff happening in general, but just, I mean, in this industry, there's so much activity. We're getting the feeling, the Ides of March, right? We're getting the feeling of spring coming, and there's just something really exciting. So today, I actually went into New York City to meet with Lars and Patrick from Uniform, which was really great to catch up with them and just to get acquainted, get some Matt from iMedia to come and meet with them. And really, I like to take the opportunity, much like I think you do. If there's a chance to meet someone, they're going to be around, go do it. Good things are going to
Oh yeah.
happen when you do that. And the thing for me that's interesting with Uniform is that they seem to be doing a lot of things really well and thinking well about how to make a product that is for the modern technology stack, right? And they broke it down into, we have a composable DXP, we have, they're still using the DXC, we have an orchestration system layer for, much like we were saying about Mock Alliance in our last talk,
Yeah.
Mock Alliance is for a really evolved customer, right? If you're using all Mock and you have just, it's like the doctorate of the tech stack, and their product can be very good for being something to orchestrate that. And then of course they lean into personalization. But in some ways, their story of evolution and how they were launched, they came really from a background at Sitecore, is kind of like how the industry at large is. And I know you've done some work and connection around Uniform, I guess, because I met them today. It's never a bad thing to bring up some thoughts on it.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the Uniform story goes back to before Uniform and sort of the genesis of this idea, and getting to hear Lars talk at some of our Boye and company meetings about Jamstack, about composability, and you sort of building on the sort of the evolution from having that Sitecore heritage. What I have found interesting about Uniform is I think that they always focus on the gap. Like, they always focus on the area where there's a break or there's an issue in sort of making things work together. And I think it's funny because Darren Garnaccia, who was for a spell the president of the company, came from Crown Peak, so we had some intersection there. He and I have met in person a couple of times in Seattle, and I think what's interesting is the story has been, we're acting as kind of antithetical to glue code to kind of hack things together, and at the same time I feel like they often are the glue in things. They often are solving this last mile of problem. You just mentioned with sort of that short-lived dalliance with DXC, digital experience composition, and trying to sort of foment this idea in the corpus of having a new category. I think that met with some friction from a company actually called DXC. But on top of that, I think other platforms have solved that problem, but it's because they were doing it. It's because they were stitching together the right kind of solution. They were solving that last mile of visualization. So they have always been like, I think, ahead in terms of how they're thinking, and moving very quickly, like moving fast. And I think that the tool itself, the platform itself, is designed around accelerating things, taking it from prototype very quickly into production, being able to test things. I did an article last November with Lars about cold starts. How do you go from 0 to 1, but then 0 to 60? And how do you accelerate the prototyping process with the kind of this genesis of vibe coding? And I saw last summer a couple of examples out in California with their team of how that was beginning to work with Cursor. And fast forward to November, when I talked to Lars, he took me through Scout AI, which is their assistant in the tool, and how quickly and easily you can build out prototypes for complete experiences. So I love they've always been at the edge, and kind of accelerating things. And I think it then becomes a little bit of a template for other tools to look at and say, hey, we need that as well. That I would say that was true too of their adoption of a CMS, right? So while they were working with CMSs, mostly those CMSs in the headless category, like Agility is a good example. They were working with those vendors to kind of provide an ecosystem play. And Mark Demany at the time was working with them and wrote this like, I don't know, like Magna Carta, like this huge sort of analysis of all the CMSs out in the marketplace. And composable was such a strong theme in that. But I love how they were approaching it in that they wanted to, we want to work with our headless partners because they have more robust solutions, more scalable for their customers. At the same time, you may have a project that requires a very quick turnaround. So why not prototype it here, test it, maybe, throw a few shots at it, and it can stay in that CMS, or we can migrate it very easily through connectors into the CMS of your choice. I think the flexibility, having guardrails around certain things is really important, but that modular approach makes it a very unique ecosystem inside the broader digital experience marketplace. So I think it's great to look at them to see where they're going. But then, there are just many, many customers that they, continue to make a difference for as well.
Well, and I just love when you're meeting with a founder and then Pat, who I think is the global head of sales, but then the founder just starts opening up the demo and showing,
It's the best.
behind the curtain. I mean, that's a
Yeah,
great part of our Boeing
yeah.
Company CMS Idol contest is when the founders actually come up and
Y-
do the dirty.
all right, do the dirty. You know who did that for me was Alex at Optimizely, CEO. He during a conversation we were having about their CMP, a really broad set of marketing centric tools that they were introducing, and they showed me a little bit of their Opal capabilities and how that was layering on top of that. And this goes back a little ways to last year, before some of the newer things that I've talked about with Kevin, their head of product. But at the time, it was novel, and I think he wanted to show me how he's using it. So he opens up, he's like, "Hey, hang on one second, Matt, I just want to show you this." So he brings up the demo, and you maybe expect that from, the sort of the founder CEO of a scale up. But I think for the CEO of a large enterprise to be able to open up the product and show you how he's using it is awesome, right? It's just a great testament to how scalable, flexible, and as Andre Karpathy said, English is the hottest new programming language. We're abstracting the complexity out of more of the tools, and I think what's emerging from that is a much more accessible set of resources for marketers, coders as well, right? We just talked about uniform and how they're, I think, accelerating things, but also abstracting the complexity with code where more people can get on the train faster and earlier. And that's a good segue, I think, to a conversation that I had with Debbie Tusick from Kentico a couple weeks ago, and I just published a story this week that kind of zeroed in on their agentic marketing suite. And I see a lot of the bigger vendors, the enterprise vendors in the DXP, composable DXP, larger integrated suites, really moving in this direction of focusing on the marketer. What can we do to leverage AI, harness agentic AI to help the marketer? And I think that's of course surfacing in the assistive capabilities that exist in these tools. Case in point, they have their own flavor. So does Optimizely, so does Sitecore. But I think we're seeing how they're being instrumented around the campaign flows, the ability to arm marketers with the essential context to do things in a much more meaningful way. And in Alex's example with Opal, being able to use the content marketing platform features of Optimizely to, be able to schedule things, to like actually be in control of how he was managing a PR strategy. Like he actually named it. He actually created the PR strategy. He created calendar schedule expectations. I mean, it's, I think, reducing the barriers to make it much more extensible, even to executives of companies that maybe are probably more interested on day-to-day in finance and things like that, to really understand their product is an awesome testament to how AI is breaking down these barriers.
Yeah, I mean, it's in every conversation, and there's some pieces from I was at the Boye Company Canada meetup on Wednesday, and there was just a phenomenal thing which we'll talk about. But I wanted to ask, because of the time we're in March, um, just for anyone wondering, the Sweet 16 for the DXP CMS March Madness that I run will be announced on March 15th, and we'll commence that. But you had your CMS Critic Awards, which it's pretty cool when you create something and then you see just like this flurry of executives. And I saw all the Sitecore commentary. I'd love to see the analytics that you're seeing, but right from CEO Eric Stein on down, and I think they had 8 wins. Can you talk a little bit about about the CMS Critic Awards and what that win
Yeah.
kind of stands for?
Yeah, so next year will be 15 years of doing this. So it is a long-standing tradition. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be celebratory of the industry at large, and friendly competition. Invariably, it does create a lot of friction. There are questions that people have, even though things are very clear. I think clearly mapped out. There are sometimes some challenges I think around communicating things, but the bottom line is the whole idea is to enroll people in communities to charge everyone else up, get them excited about the prospect of being able to elevate visibility for their product. This is not me or anyone from our team, in any way, shape, or form applying any kind of judgment on a tool. This is about allowing the loyalty. It's allowing the fan base around these products to emerge and show some love for the tools that they use on a day-to-day basis. So it's great to see that there is friendly competition. There is you can see it out there. You're right, from an analytics perspective, it's just it's a big gain because there's so much engagement around it. And what I enjoy the most is when I see how I think last year Umbraco had like 5, so they really brought their community last year. And year to year, there's fluctuation. I think just in terms of the ability for either marketing teams or folks inside organizations to get the word out to their teams and use social media to do it. But the way that they get creative around it is it's always fun to watch, right? I mean, there are people making videos, they're doing TikTok videos, so it's a cross media in terms of engagement. And again, the intention for us was always to make it fun, make it lighthearted, and allow the communities to do the work, and to see the level of engagement and interaction is always, I mean, that's that's just a testament to, I think, the stickiness that these communities have. That the not just the product, but the people using it, whether they're directly or indirectly, like yourself, you're an MVP with Sitecore, but outside of that, just the practitioners, the people in the field using the tool to be part of this is really gratifying to watch. I think that it's awards programs sometimes get a bad rap, and we could probably spend a whole episode talking about that. Um, that's why we try to elevate the energy in a positive way. That this is all done through a friendly, um, in a friendly container, and it allows each of these vendors and their communities to do all the work. It's 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 fun. I mean, I don't know any other way to frame it. Is we do it once a year, thankfully, because it is a lot of work. But you're doing this with March Madness as well. We kind of like have this continuity, I think, between CMS Critic Awards, which sort of starts at the very end of the calendar year prior, and then we have a nomination period through the first month, about 3.5 weeks, and then we have the actual general voting where we pick the top five. Um, um, Vote getters, and they're listed, and then we kind of run into March, and you're already starting to promote, I think, in February. So there's a bit of overlap there. But what do you see in terms of the way that communities engage, and what stands out for you?
Well, mine hasn't been 15 years, but it's been 4. So it's enough to really. The part that's so interesting to me is, I've read about these companies that exist in like the world of the show Billions, where they fly planes over parking garages to
Yeah.
see how full the parking garage is to determine the fundamentals of the economy, right? And I think there's something like the parking garage is empty or full that I love about this. You can see in the grand scheme of an industry or of an economy who's up and who's down by this signal, by this metronome that comes around every year. So, like you said, some years you get a whole company rowing, some years you don't. And it doesn't mean that they're not as into it. There can be changing things going on. Oftentimes, I find it to be a signal of either a trough or a peak for a company,
Could be.
right?
Could be.
And it goes through that. So I find that signals, the industry signals, to be really fascinating. I also cannot get enough of something that you kind of sit at the center of, and seeing the way you brought it up, people making TikTok videos, all this. I love during this period of time seeing the way that companies go out there and look for likes, as I would say, campaign for likes.
Yeah.
I mean, around the world, globally, CEOs. I remember last year when Plate, who were back at it, and really fascinating company. Peter Versloot, the
Yeah.
founder, is just a really smart. He's
Yeah.
a
It is.
legit CEO kind of guy, but he can have fun. I remember he put this whole video together last year where they were talking about how they were going to win. Thought it was Newt Rockney or something. They probably wouldn't understand that allusion, but
Well, I think didn't Brianna uh,
Brenna
from
Sims, yeah,
Simplicity, right? Brianna Sims from Simplicity, really it was like gangbusters. Like she brought the rain in the end. And I
yeah,
think that while there are potentially signals to kind of interpret in the ethos, I also think that there's, for grassroots movements around, smaller or scale up types of products, it's an opportunity for them to, in the same way that you watch college basketball, got to bring back sports, but in the same way you watch college basketball, it's like anything can happen, right? So you can have a small or up and coming product like a Plate, like a Simplicity, that maybe doesn't have near the density of a Sitecore in terms of a builder community, partner community, but they're still able to engage people. And while my format is probably a little bit more inclined around the macro in terms of, communities being able to leverage that muscle. Interestingly, it can change from year to year. To your point, that may indicate that it's not being telegraphed or messaged or yeah, I've noticed in the last couple of years that there's just been a lot more enthusiasm around it, a lot more people participating in it. So I think that's vendors looking for a way to be able to kind of harness, again, not just the likes, but also the visibility and the lift in awareness. But outside of that, I think those small platforms, when like a Cinderella team appears out of nowhere and they're able to make a run for the big dance, it's exciting to watch. Right. And that's what I like about March Madness as a format is it does a thing that CMS Critic Awards doesn't do, in that they have that that stake in it. And I like that. I've always liked that about the concept.
Yeah, no, I mean, I always just get tickled by, like I said, the user generated content that kicks up. The story, I'll be talking to a seller at one vendor and they'll say, "Oh, the CEO was speaking to the entire Indian team in a company kickoff, and that CEO said everyone's got to go out there and vote for March Madness." And you're sitting there going, "This concocted thing is a culture maker."
Right.
It allows, as I like to say, because I always, as you do, like to say, it's a friendly thing. This is not one versus another. This is let's all win, let's raise all boats.
Yeah.
Um, but it's like it really galvanizes companies around that kind of sports feeling. And I'm always the most fascinated when the European companies jump up and take it by storm because they have no idea what March Madness is.
Right.
And they're just jumping into this thing, and, it could be a Borat movie for all you know, but they jump in like crazy, love it, people making songs. That
Yeah.
is, and names are getting out there writ large, and so what I started to try to add to this last year, I mean, even the year before, but last year, in a much more, prepared way, is to do these behind the madness interviews for 15 minutes with preferably a founder, CEO, to go through just like they would in March Madness with a head coach, where you
Right.
talk about how your year went, how excited you are, and then to do scouting reports so that we can tell the stories of the companies while riding above this wave of engagement that's happening. So it's a lot of fun. I mean, there's some times if like we got our first for my 11-year-old, we have our first baseball baseball tournament of the season starting this weekend, and there will be times where I'll be 4 hours into baseball and I get this moment of like horror to think that this thing depends on me moving it to the next, because you get caught up in things. You're like, oh my god, this whole thing in March Madness depends on me getting to this next thing. So you have these little moments that spring you to sober attention, but it it's the community who runs it, but you just need to move the chess pieces along
Yeah.
to get to the next phase. So yeah, no, really exciting, and we'll see how the real March Madness looks. So I figure why don't we maybe pivot a little bit to this week in Boye Company. And I know Giannis went from Vancouver, British Columbia, to Toronto, to Montreal in 3 straight days. And I flew in Porter Airlines turboprop plane from Newark right into Billy Bishop, one of my favorite things in the world once you land, because you land, you go through customs, and you walk into downtown. I walked to lunch on Wednesday right off the plane. And but when I was talking to Giannis, he looked very tired on Wednesday. And I said, "When did you get in?" He goes, "Oh, I flew a red eye." I never had considered in my life a red eye in Canada. For some
Yeah.
reason, it's so weird to me. Someone going from Vancouver to Toronto on a red eye.
It's enough hours. It's enough hours, yeah. Yeah, I have not done that myself, and, been to Vancouver, several times, but I would imagine that it's a fairly, yeah, that back and forth is, I mean, obviously, if they have the flight available, there's enough traffic, there's enough demand for it. So what were things? What were the takeaways of this meeting? And then, by the way, I guess now Giannis is now an official sponsor of Matt and Matt. Is that it seems like that might be the case.
Yeah, I think so. March Madness, the boys, the men's basketball tournament, the boys basketball tournament. But he really great. Um, Caught up a lot with Joel Vardy, the CTO of Agility CMS, from lunch. Just love Joel, and
Yeah.
I just don't catch up with him enough. But in this kind of moment, you can spend the better part of a day together. So he was at the lunch. I wanted to get some Tim Hortons after lunch because I'm in Canada. And he said, no, look next door. This is the best place, a place called Jimmy's. He was right. That was tremendous. But the thing I love about Joel, which probably leads to what I love about these conferences, is he's got the digital notebook. And he, as a CTO, a leader, product leader in a headless CMS, is out there learning still
Yep.
and taking every note. Wrote a really good recap article, which you can find on the Boye Company blog, and is literally having epiphanies during the day, and he's not making that up, right? I mean, so we talked a lot about both him and just everybody, because Justin Cook from Ninth Co also came to lunch and then was at the conference. And we talked a ton about AEO, GEO, as a wedge into business, as the be all and end all of a lot of marketing projects in digital now.
Yeah.
But really the standout presentation of the whole day was from Sean Stanley, who's the director of the Globe Content Studio at the Globe and Mail. So the Globe and Mail is the
Oh,
very
yeah.
big Toronto-based newspaper.
Yep.
I'd say it's probably equivalent in some ways to the New York Times, right, for Canada.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's on that level. Yep. Yeah.
and oh my gosh, he was just talking to all of us about the power of storytelling. But I mean, I know that could be like a bromide, whatever, but like literally getting point by point into the power of storytelling and how you should tell story first and worry about format second. That is above all. And then it led into the way that they curate all the kinds of content and what's important in content in a newspaper and in what is effectively a D2C company, right? In news. And um, the way they edit and the way they work with the LLMs and licensing versus not. And he kept saying this word, do we feed the beast? So he's almost calling the LLM in some ways the beast. And it was just, it probably went on a bit long for Giannis's likes, which, he likes to have a very strict time a little bit, but it just spurred so much conversation and really aligned to the fact that the power of storytelling is just really always the smart tactic above anything. And that when we're talking about how to surface in GEO and be cited, it's especially important because you're given the firsthand experience of the storytelling. But yeah, we heard from Havis CX because we were in their offices. One of my favorite parts of these conferences are just going into offices around the world that you never
Mm,
would go to otherwise, and then
right. Right.
almost spending time like it's yours. And there was a funny moment where I had to step outside to the kitchen area, fully stocked kitchen, and take a call for my company. And as I'm kind of walking around there, I see this guy shuffle in a suit, and he looked really important. And he looked over at me in the corner and basically was like, "Who the hell is this guy?" Like, and then I was talking to someone, and they said like, "Oh, he's I don't know, the CEO of some group." And I go, "Okay, makes sense." And he was cool with me, but he had that look of like, "Who is this?" Like
Stay
I'm
away from my
expecting to
lunch
know
in the
everyone,
fridge. Right.
like what's going on. But uh, really great event, and then added a couple of folks came on my invite that I had worked with at Altudo. One still works there, named Siam. He's one of the best GEO people I've worked with, and he's in his mid-20s. Like he's precocious. And then Prakash, which sounds like precocious, who works now with Konabos, where I used to work. he lives around Toronto and actually came in to come here. That's one of my favorite things is seeing new folks exposed to this group.
Yeah.
And I feel like a proud father, even though I'm not saying I have dominion over them, but when they start speaking and contributing, and you're like, oh, this is great. And then the whole room just accepts it and moves the conversation forward. So yeah, really, really good day, I'd say, around the GEO. Um, there was, of course, data sovereignty. Mark wasn't there, so there was no ontology. But yeah,
You believe
so
Mark wasn't
that was
there?
a lot of
Wow.
the takeaways. Yeah, that was a lot of the takeaways. You're in a lot of these. What is it like for you when you see the outputs from the events? Is it almost like, I don't want to say like the papal conclave when when the smoke comes out,
The
but
red smoke. We've made a choice. We've decided. It shall be a fan of Chicago sports franchises. Um, I think I have a very similar experience. That although depending on the group, I think the dynamic can affect how much work goes into extracting that. Particularly when you have new people who haven't been before, and they may not be. One thing that I think is a sort of persistent phenomenon would be that people who have not been, who don't know anyone, um, they want to crawl into a shell in a lot of cases, right? They feel like they're either underqualified. Many people have said to me, I'm not a CMS expert. I don't belong in this room. I don't feel like I have anything to contribute. The capacity for us, I think, to create a very open, uh, trusting, and I think supportive environment for people to talk about things. When I ran the Detroit meeting last summer, I was coming from California. I stopped in Michigan on the way back, and we did it at the Detroit Museum of Art. And I mean, we love art museums as sort of a reflection of content management and ontologies and semantic structured systems. But I think more importantly, it's a creative environment, so people feel a little more at ease. I think it's solemn, there's a quietude about it. And it allows us to be introspectful, but also create enough space for people to have their voice heard. So I always appreciate that about you know, yes, there are those of us who get very senatorial when we're given a microphone, but I think making the space and allowing other folks in the room to have a podium in our town square to talk about what's happening. And in Detroit, we ended up talking about stuff that was not on my agenda at all. I heard from people probably more on the topic of AI anxiety than anything else, as practitioners either working in that museum around the community, and maybe having a couple people like Brian Kiever of BizStream attend and talk about some of the challenges that we have around energy relative to data centers and what companies like Microsoft are actually doing to combat that. So I think bringing some real world perspective, not to challenge people's preconceived notions when they come in the room, but to offer some solace, some outside perspective to balance out maybe an assumption that they had. And if you go into that room, anywhere we have these meetings, and like Oliver Daberkow he's president, I think, of Typo 3 now, but his agency is based in Frankfurt. We did a little excursion over to check it out in between the 2 days, I think, at our Frankfurt meetings, or maybe it was the first day after lunch. But again, to your point, we get to go into other people's homes, and we get that opportunity to see how they live, how they work together. And I think that colors this in such a unique way. It makes this a very different kind of experience for people that participate in it. And that's, I think, why we continue to grow the community, because you can't get this anywhere else.
well, one of the funny things is this wasn't even meant to come up, but you brought up the what Brian McKeever was talking about with the energy pull, I think, of AI, right?
Yeah.
And I was flying when I was flying home on the turboprop plane yesterday. I was reading one of the recent Barron's issues, and it was talking about how you should look at investing in energy companies, right? Like the winner from AI to make money might be actually investing in the energy companies behind it. And then in that article, there was a really fascinating quote to me. They were talking about how there have been energy teams within big tech companies for a long time, like over a decade, but it was always about conservation. And so this quote was, these energy teams, they were built to meet a climate goal. They weren't built to produce tens of gigawatts of capacity in a short amount of time. And now they're going to have to. And like, I never thought about the way AI and tech is now like that. There's actually energy experts in these companies, and they had to go from like, how the heck do we conserve and build servers on boats so it uses water? And now they're like, no, we need to go get like smokestacks.
Or in orbit, right? I think Bezos talked about putting them in low Earth orbit. Interestingly, what Brian and I said, because we both were the contrarians, right? So we were trying to kind of soften some of the assumptions of AI as the doom and gloom. And I think there were several people that had, kind of felt that way. And I think depending on the day of the week and what you read, that can have a strong influence on whether you're a pragmatist or a pessimist. But what I would say is that the way that we approached it is, Brian brought up an example, great example of how Microsoft is recapturing some of the greenhouse that is expelling from data centers to power local establishments, maybe municipalities, small cities. So they're actually feeding some of the heat back into the energy system. So laws of thermodynamics are at play, and they're successfully pursuing ways of doing that. For a long time, AWS has focused on trying to minimize, through a series of how they're shifting the impact of how compute is being used at any one given time. They've got that down to a science where they can minimize the amount of energy usage. Now that's about dollars and cents. But I think in the long run, it's going to be a combination of things. Yes, we're going to need more energy, but we're also exploring how, we look at OpenClaw, right? I mean, this thing has sort of captured everyone's imagination over the last couple of months. And I think the idea that open source, local, small language model type of applications could be part of the solution as well, right? Do we need AI operating in the cloud at a level where it's consuming more of that energy, or could we run smaller language models locally, or some of the tools that we need to utilize on a local level? The last thing I'm going to say about it, which I think is a really interesting conversation to continue with as we do this, is I think and this will kind of lead, I think, nicely into this Clean Data Alliance conversation I had, but we're at this like tipping point with all of this, right? Where I think, the tool, obviously Claude shook the world with SAS. We talked a little bit about that last time. Since we last talked, the world is at conflict again. I did a podcast episode with Soren Stamer, who's the CEO of Core Media, German-based DXP. We talked a lot about digital sovereignty, but I think this tipping point, we're seeing a lot of these things happen at the same time. And at the center of it all is energy. So to kind of validate your point, I think businesses are going to have to think a lot about that energy, not just the conservation of it, but the expenditure of it. And ultimately, this is going to translate into a token economy where I was just reading an article on Medium today. An expert in AI who was that I follow, who was talking about how he is now looking at agent strategies through the lens of cost, right? Is it worth it for me to light these agents up if it's going to cost me X, Y, Z? And he was using OpenClaw, I think, on a, and this is a very important distinction with OpenClaw due to security issues, but you should run it on a separate computer. Don't let it loose on your email, I think is the bottom line, right? So train it on a Mac Mini has become a popular way to run it. But the idea with OpenClaw is the example is that, you could do more of this stuff locally, but the cost to use AI may someday be more expensive than having a human do it, right? The cost to burn tokens for some of the more mundane tasks may be off the table. Hey, you have to go write this email yourself because we need AI to do these more important things in our company today. things like saving people's lives or, computing some trajectory for an asteroid that's heading for us. I think we're going to be in that phase where all of these things at this tipping point now start to become clearer. We're having the conversations, and then obviously the geopolitics, the societal challenges that we're dealing with right now are all kind of piling on top of that. So I love that you were talking about this at the Boye Company event. I want to quickly we don't have much more time. I want to quickly talk about a couple things if we can that
Sure.
came up this week. Tangentially to this was, and you can read this on cmscritic.com, but I had a conversation with Michael Munson, who has started this thing called the Clean Data Alliance. Now, I've been following other industry alliances. Obviously, I'm involved with the Mock Alliance. There are a lot of alliances out there. I think
We
that's
do.
good, right?
We
It's
do.
when we bring people together, like-minded people together to potentially do positive things in the world. One of them is the Data and Trust Alliance, which I've tracked for a number of years. They've had kind of a role in previous Boye Company meetings as well. You can check out some of the stories I've done on that. But Clean Data Alliance is kind of a new player in this idea of dirty data, right? And creating kind of this intersection of principles around how we should be treating data with respect to its accuracy, longitude, locality, different key components that kind of define the data from a trust perspective. And the fact is, we have so much dirty data out there that is being used to train LLMs, which is something I talked to Lucy Greco, who's an accessibility expert. Also ran a story 2 weeks ago on that. She's been blind since birth, an incredible evangelist and advocate for accessibility, but has a lot of anxiety around AI as well because, there are big questions about whether or not it's accounting for all the nuance with accessibility. The reason why I bring up the intersection of these things is because I think when you take a practitioner like that who worries about how AI is going to affect the tooling for someone who is using a large language model to interpret something from a website, well, you want to make sure you have good data for everything, right? You want to have good data for the tools that people with disabilities depend on. So I think there's an outsized role for finding ways to create standards for improving the sources. Data and Trust Alliance is doing that around metadata for AI. So the ride-along data that comes with, say, a data set that you get for training a healthcare model that's going to work on some kind of say like a type 2 diabetes research project. You want to make sure that you know where that data came from. So it has that provenance associated with it. And with the Clean Data Alliance, it's about, what are sources that they're training on in general, are they following these standards? And I think it maybe has kind of a broader market application. It's very new, so I will say that, but it kind of caught my interest, and we did a story on it. And then I want to maybe just get your perspective on agencies a little bit. Obviously, agencies are part of our ecosystem. I talked to one of our favorite people, Chad Solomonson of RDA. We did a story about how RDAs scored this really high net promoter score, what that means, right? How more than ever, the ability for an agency through word of mouth and through relationships to be recommended to other customers is so important. And I think a lot of this has to do as well with the kind of the bleeding edge role that companies like RDA are playing when it comes to translating the value of AI. Right? I think enterprises are looking for a place to start. They have their own internal skunk works about AI projects. We know through the Bain and MIT studies that a lot of these projects fail. So I think they're looking at agencies as, kind of the portal for being able to successfully achieve these kinds of projects, get to good outcomes. And that's exactly what Chad and his company are seeing. But I want to get your perspective when you think about agencies. You work for an agency, obviously, you're in the ecosystem, and then you worked on the agency side with both the vendors and the customer. What do you think right now are the big stakes for agencies at an age where the revenue models are being challenged? You mentioned GEO before. I think this is a good way for us to thread the needle on that conversation. But talk to me a little bit about your perspective on all this.
Yeah, I think overall, I don't know if it's just because of AI. I think it was also composability, uh, and headless and Jamstack, like we said with Lars. But there there used to be a world where you could just do, it was like building, it was military contracting. You could build systems and have developers full with 40 hours a week for months and months and months on end. And the composability broke this up. It got you to market quicker. There's not as much to program for as long. Then AI came and it's like supercharged in that. So I truly think an agency is it's in a place of probably where it feels like there's crisis and complete disruption, but you have to look towards the opportunity. And I've been saying this not because I'm in a company like this now that's a little leaner, but I think it's easier to 10x a 25 to 50 person agency than it is to 10x an 800 person agency. And um, that's where AI can really help. And I think being nimble, having a lot of that experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness will allow you to kind of morph into what will be the agency of the
Hmm.
future. We don't know what that is exactly yet, but it's probably going to be a lot more customers, potentially smaller engagements at a time. And I always like that term SOW by SOW. Everyone wants retainers for here on, you want predictability, but we're really in a time where you have to prove your value
Hmm.
continually. And it's funny because GEO, I believe, has created a wedge. It might be the greatest wedge in the history of the digital agency. It's the most clear way to get somebody to answer and have a discussion, because we've said this before. GEO, generative engine optimization, is about loss. SEO was about gain. When there's loss, people feel it, they want to talk about it, they want to write it, they're going to listen. And when you start looking at the different channels of things and how competitors are doing and how you're doing, and gap analysis, and um, you can actually make the difference up pretty quickly as well because of AI. So I just, there's not quite the answer yet. There's a little bit of a gold rush because of AI and GEO.
Hmm.
And I don't know that a lot of people are finding the gold. They know it's in, was it that it's in them thar hills, but it's, it's a very, very, I think it's better to be lean right now and smart. And it got me back to when you were even talking about clean data. Clean data is can be easily 10x'd. And Kimberly McCabe, who used to work with me at Altudo, she's worked at Sitecore, she's worked at a lot of really high level places. She gave a great talk in London where the part that I really took away, and a week later she had brought up this. I didn't remember it from the talk, but we're so focused on 10xing everything that we're not focused on what we're 10xing. So if you go back to clean data, if you go back to high level players as individuals in agencies, you want to find what you're going to 10x and then 10x that, as opposed to just be out there, shooting a semi-automatic on 10xing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a great point. And we had Carla Santi had a great presentation she gave at kickoff about some of the realities that agencies faced last year, how they're trying to adapt. Can you get to a model that is more kind of like the compute based models that we see in cloud, where it's either you license accelerators. We see that shift from accelerators into more of a either you're building something on Opal or you're building something on a product or a platform, and there's some notion of a proprietary go-to-market strategy around that, and that the consumption on that is somehow part of the math that equals X number of dollars annually, as opposed to, in the same way that we don't want to pay expensive licensing fees for anything. I've seen this shake up in CDP, and now seeing it in things like customer journey orchestration platforms. Just doing a story right now on a company that's relative newcomer to CRO, which can conversion optimization, and I think the idea that the customer doesn't want to pay this, but also what is the value of it, right? How do we even equate the value to it? GEO, I think is, and Justin actually wrote, Justin Cook, Ninth and Co. actually wrote an article for me, I think 2 weeks ago, kind of talking through a very technical lens, but very approachable. Some of the considerations when it comes to, how do we look at this? And it was because I had, I'd run a contributor article, I think maybe the week before, about GEO. And, it's stirring the pot, I think, around this conversation of where is the value in this? How do you quantify it? Can we actually say we're going to deliver, elevate visibility, and drive performance? And I think companies like Conductor are really trying to do this. I mean, they've got a platform that's within their ecosystem that is focused on GEO. And I've done a couple of articles with them. A really smart person who's kind of running their tech as well is based out of San Francisco. And I'll say that in those conversations, I've asked the question, how do partners translate this? How do we quantify it for their customer? And I think everyone's still trying to figure this part out. I will say that between them and Otterly AI and a few others that are, I mean, we can see that SEMrush, now part of Adobe, is, kind of rapidly moving this area. What you just said is exactly right. This is why GEO is a boardroom conversation, as opposed to being, down in the marketing trenches. Everyone just talked about SEO down there. Now we go to board meetings and people are saying, what are we doing about this lost traffic? And I think that's lighting a fire under enterprises, organizations, to do something from a very strategic level. I mean, the loss of that traffic is an existential threat. And I think that's why it's become an elevated conversation. At the same time, I think, like you said, we're still in the dark, kind of looking for the light switch on how it's paid for, how we equate value to it, and what does it actually deliver? Are we able to, actually deliver on the promise as an agency? But I think just in general, the idea of GEO being a force multiplier for traffic.
Well, and I'll end on an interesting little case study. It's not a closed one case study, but I think it's an interesting case study for the modern life of an agency. I did a post about a month ago. I try to post a lot about GEO because people want it, and you can connect it to a host of things that you're talking about. And I did one such post, and I noticed not everybody wants to affirm your post because they don't want to get caught agreeing. But I do tend to get text messages. I got a text message from someone I know from a pretty large transportation organization in New Jersey, and they said, "Hey, I saw your post. Can we talk about this?" So a post led to a text message, which led to a talk, which led to an absolute interest in doing a little pre-sales audit on GEO. This organization uses BrightEdge, which is a pretty expensive and really solid product for typically SEO, but then now they have the GEO. I then started my job here. I've been drinking from the fire hose, traveling all over. I can't get to doing this thing that should move a deal along. And then last week I was like, you know what? I'm getting all these vibes. That's not the word to use now, but I'm getting all these feelings from people that this Claude Cowork is unbelievable. I downloaded it. I worked with it on GEO audit stuff. I kept working with it, prompting it with actual data. It put together an unbelievable, true pre-sales audit. I mean, unbelievable. Like right down to every level you could want out of it, competitor analysis, all this. It even put together a 90-day backlog of what humans would do to do the work. And then I said, because I know this is a very revenue generated, as most companies are, I think this is where you want to base things as an agency. You want to be about growth and revenue optimization. You used that word before.
Yeah.
It's not about conversions and as much, conversions for revenue, right? It's not page views, all that stuff. It is, how do you hook to conversions? I worked with Claude Cowork to put together a model of the ROI. It put 3 models: conservative, optimistic, major win type of thing. And it said, can we feed it the actual data from this organization to make the model true, or do you want industry standards? Used industry standards. Unbelievable slide
Yeah.
about what you're going to get for the investment, ROI 6x, these many leads, this many. And then going back to the real world, I met this person in Hoboken today after I came back from uniform, and we went over the presentation in person and worked on how we can go forward with it. So I think right there is potentially a modern allegory of the agency.
Yeah. And then there's this the awful word under attribution. Attribution. How do you repeat this? So can I go all the way back and follow the dots? And I think on this, micro level where you say you're running lean and kind of embracing the relationship cell first and foremost, I think that's part of it. I think that the relationship stake in all of this for agencies continues to be such an important thing. But I still think that enterprise software, when there's so much complexity involved with what an RDA, as an example, is being asked to build, is still very important. I know we're going to wrap things up. One thing I wanted to mention too, really quickly, was just on our whole vibe coding conversation. I think the news earlier this week about AWS and their engineering team kind of drawing a straight line between vibe coding and cloud outages, I think is really interesting. I think you guys talked a little bit about that in Canada as well, but I think it elevates, at a time when we're talking about, the Jack Dorseys of the world, cutting half his staff and other vocal leaders. And I talked to Chris Domo Chris Willis at Domo. He's their chief creative officer, about, how we value humans in all of this. And I've been saying since last year, I think we're amassing a lot of tech debt. And that is indeed what we are doing. And I think the vibe coding revolution, while it is insanely cool on one level, and it's sort of opening up what a developer is, we still need a control group of really smart developers who are running it like a pull request in a classic DevOps operation. I need my coders to submit their code. I need someone to validate it and look at it. I think AI is going to be part of all of this, but what we're seeing, and I've heard from other sources as well that I can't mention, that this is a problem at hyperscalers, that they are seeing the code that is generated by vibe coding within their organizations impacting performance. And if that's just one example of all the enterprises who say, hey, 25% of my code is now coming from AI. Okay. Right. So maybe it's a pump the brakes moment about how we're reviewing that code, how we're validating that code. So we're following a lot of stories. Again, people can check it out at cmscritic.com. More stuff to come. Congratulations to Sitecore for winning in as many categories as they did. We having a conversation. I think I'm going to see Eric Stein this week when I'm in New York. But more to come there. And this is another great episode. We made it to 2, man.
We did. Thanks, Matt. Safe travels to New York. Hopefully I'll see you up here too.
All right, bud. Yeah, we'll keep in touch. Talk to you soon.